Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on Vulcan utilizing the digital protocol, collaborating to accelerate ICH M11 and end user value. My name is Stacy Teagan. I work with Transcelerate Biopharma, and as part of my role in Transcelerate, I also work with Vulcan, the HL7 Fire Accelerator, and CDISC. And I'm excited to say this webinar is jointly hosted by those three organizations. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to have a very exciting panel discussion and hear from speakers from different perspectives. We're going to hear from regulators and their perspectives on why a digital protocol will bring value. We'll hear from Chris Decker, CDISC CEO, to learn about the projects that Transcelerate and CDISC have worked on that are going to be foundational to that digital protocol. And we'll hear from Hugh Glover, the technical director at Vulcan, who will touch back to what Ron Fitzmartin and Noemie Manent, our regulators, are saying for ICH M11 and how that is going to come through the Vulcan UDP project. And finally, we'll hear from Lynn Mercado around how we forge the pathway to implementation. And then we'll take some questions at the end. Next slide. A few logistics for today. If you're not familiar with GoToWebinar, you can manipulate the screens a bit here. I want to point out particularly the questions panel. You can undock this place here on the side. You can enter your questions there. It is helpful when you enter your questions if you can call out which speaker you'd like the question to go to. But this control panel has a number of controls to help your viewing. Participants are going to be muted on this call, and we are recording it for sharing after the call. Next slide. Also want to call out that we have a handout. It is a bit of a quick reference guide. It has some quick links. If you go to the handouts panel, you should be able to click on the PDF. And if you have any issues, we can also drop a direct link into the chat for today. Again, this handout here will be made available, as well as all the materials will be sent to registrants. And the recording will be posted after, and you should feel free to share both the recording and the materials with colleagues in your organization. Okay, next slide. Just a few ground rules for today. We are going to keep the discussion focused on this particular project. There's a lot happening in this space, but we'll keep it focused there. Today, the participation of the speakers, of the attendees, it's all voluntary, as is use of any of the Transcelerate tools. We would of course trust the folks who are using them to address compliance with laws and regulations. When you're in the chat identifying questions, you don't have to identify what company you work for. You should feel free to ask private questions there. We will not be able to discuss things like specific vendor sites, CROs that folks are working with. Really, all the content here is about making tools available for all. So we're going to stay away from any specific discussions of companies or pricing, and we're going to stay focused on the digital protocol. I think that will be all very easy. Next slide. So at this time, I'd like to invite all of our panelists to come on screen. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. This is a collaborative project, and many folks wear many hats. I myself mentioned I am wearing a Transcelerate and a Vulcan hat, and of course I've partnered with CDISC as well. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself, your various roles, and then what is your opinion of the real value of a digitized protocol? What will that bring to the ecosystem? So Hugh, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, hi, good afternoon everybody, or good morning or good evening, wherever you are. I'm Hugh Glover, Technical Director at Vulcan, also the project lead of the UDP project, and I'm really delighted that we are working on this because it's something that has an enormous impact across the whole ecosystem of running clinical trials. It's easy to think of it as being something that works at the regulator end, but I'm very interested in the way that individual companies can use it internally and between companies, because I think there's tremendous potential for reduction of error and improvement of efficiency as a whole.
Thank you, Hugh. Mary Lynn?
Hi, thank you so much for joining. My name is Mary Lynn Mercado, and my day job is as the Global Head of Protocol Delivery and U.S. Site Head for Regulatory Writing and Submissions at Novartis. And I also play a role within Transcelerate as co-workstream lead for the Clinical Content and Reuse workstream, which developed the Common Protocol template. And I also wear a hat as the Deputy Topic Lead for Pharma for ICH M11. And today I'll be speaking wearing my Transcelerate hat. And in terms of why a digital protocol is important, I'm going to offer my perspective from a Transcelerate workstream lead, but also from a medical writer perspective. So the goals of the CCNR workstream for Transcelerate were really to develop harmonized protocol structure and content and demonstrate the value of a digital protocol by laying that foundation. So we've successfully shown that we can develop a harmonized protocol template that can be utilized by sponsors. And we've also demonstrated the reuse of protocol content to downstream documents and clinical trial registries. And we're just really thrilled that this foundational work is being propelled by ongoing work in Transcelerate, ICH M11, CDISC, and Vulcan to really further extend the value and enable farther reaching use cases. And from a medical writing perspective, we can start to tackle, I think, the statistic that a protocol element is copied and pasted or retyped between 20 to 30 times across the clinical development lifecycle. So we can really spend time, as Hugh said, doing less value-added rote tasks, and we can really start to focus on the study design to yield data that can give us sort of strong decision-making power. So thank you.
That's great, Mary Lynn. Thank you. Chris, I'll turn it over to you and your thoughts.
Thanks, Stacy. I'm Chris Decker, fairly new CEO of CDISC. And CDISC is really excited to be part of the webinar today and be collaborating with all the groups and individuals on this call, as well as our cross industry. And I realized the one thing we didn't practice was our comments here and whether they overlapped. And I realized overlapping our comments is actually probably a pretty good thing because it shows we're aligned on what we're talking about. So for many years, CDISC has really been focused on the data, delivering the standards that help us really talk the same language and produce that data that we use to assess outcomes. One of the challenges we identified many years ago at CDISC was that gap in the information upstream. The protocol was and still is a Word document. And as Mary Lynn said, we copy it over and over again, and we manually transcribe information to downstream systems. And recently, I was given a statistic anonymously by a sponsored company that close to 50% of the information in a protocol is incorrectly transcribed in some downstream system. That's a staggering number if you think about it, and it really talks to the risk and the quality of the conduct of trials, to be honest. So I would say a decade ago, we didn't have the technology, we didn't have a burning platform, and most importantly, I don't really think we had the mindset to really think about how we could embrace the digital protocol and the information. I think that's changed significantly over the last 10 years, specifically over the last 5 years. And I think we now have an understanding of what we can do with this, what we could do with that digital information if we define it up front, not just from an automation standpoint and a delivery of trials, but more importantly, and what Ron and Noemie will talk about, is how we can enable consumers like regulatory agencies and academia to use this information and to get real value out of it. So at the end of the day, I think we're ready. CDISC is excited about the digital protocol, and more importantly, that we could bring this group together and these organizations together in a way to make this really move forward. So thanks.
Thanks, Chris. I love this, the tip to collaboration. Speaking all of you, preparing for this webinar, the spirit of collaboration is strong, and it makes it feel like now is the time. So thanks for hitting on that. Ron, I'll turn it over to you for introductions and your thoughts.
Yes, hi. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. Very nice to be here. Ron Fitzmartin, Center for Biologics, FDA, and ICH Rapporteur. Well, as we've been thinking about the protocol, whatever you call it, the digitized protocol, the computerized protocol for decades. And it was always there wasn't the convergence of the people, the process, and the technology. A lot of times the people got in the way because now I have my template and I'm going to use my template and process. But then the three started to align. Certainly Transcelerate started that ball rolling. That's a number of years ago, but people saw that this can work. And so then ICH got involved, and here we are, that both the three, the people, the process, and the technology have converged. And this is a very, very exciting time because no longer are we going to have just a document-centric protocol. We're going to have bits and pieces that can be assembled however you want them, however you need them, whatever your discipline is. So this is a very, very exciting time. I'm really happy to be here to share my thoughts in a bit, and great to be with this terrific panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And last but certainly not least, Noemie, would you like to introduce yourself and give your thoughts?
Yes, very good morning, very good afternoon to all. And thank you very much for inviting me. As the other panelists, it's very exciting to be able to talk about this important topic. My name is Noemie Manent. I work for the European Medicines Agency. I am the regulatory chair for ICH M11. At the agency, I have supported the change management of the introduction of the new clinical trial regulation that in fact is paired with an IT system where there we anticipate the collection of quite a lot of data in relation to clinical trials and certainly on the protocol. So what I see here with this important work is that we are certainly enabling to collaborate further than just at the EU level. We are doing an important task that is collaboration. We hear what the sponsors, what industry is looking for in terms of use cases. We also have to think about what is the usefulness and efficiency for the regulators. So I must say this is what I think about the digital protocol is that it's very much the very first link of a great achievement and looking at the future of digitalizing processes. And this is so useful and very excited to be here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Noemie. Thank you, everyone. The next part of our webinar today will have individual presentations. I want to invite all the attendees while the panelists are speaking. You can drop your questions into the question panel. We'll save those for the end, but you can go ahead and do that as we're going through the presentations. We'll first hear from Ron Fitzmartin, who will give us his view from a regulatory perspective on what that real value of a digital protocol is. The why is so important to the collaboration. I love the people, process, technology coming together. So Ron, I'll hand it to you to take us through.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Wait till the deck comes up. There we go. Okay. Next slide, please. And my disclaimer. This is all about my thoughts and certainly not those of the FDA, but I would hope that they they share them, at least some of them. So next slide, please. So everyone knows that on the line here knows what the M11 is about. We have 3 documents. We have a guideline, we have a template, and the guideline is a high-level document. It describes the why of ICH is developing an internationally harmonized protocol template. It explains the overall design, principles, and the approach that we have used to develop the documents. Although there's many use cases, as we some just mentioned, for a data-driven protocol, the primary use case that we've been focused on is the conduct of a clinical trial. And that certainly, as we all know, starts at industry side, regulatory gets involved with review, and certainly then there's the clinical site, IRBs, but it's the conduct of the clinical trial that is primary. The template has everything that one would expect in a standard, in a template: standard format, structure, common headers, instruction set, and data fields. And the tech spec is a representation of the template. It will enable electronic exchange of the protocol information, but it's important to note that it is not an implementation guide for any particular exchange format. We are working on that in parallel, but it's not part of our initial deliverables for ICH. Next slide, please. So just a quick snapshot at M11 and where we are. ICH has 5 steps. We're at step 3. We're in the middle of step 3. We finished public consultation, and we're moving towards sign off of the documents and then we'll move rapidly into adoption at step 4. So if we just talking about where we are, where we were, now where we're going, imagine the future state. Next slide, please. Or next, yeah. The protocol will be driven by a common data model. It will enable limitless personalized views of the protocol. I think this is going to be just a game changer when CDISC Transcelerate USDM model is the underlies the protocol. Then anything and everything is possible as far as looking at the protocol components. But for now, next slide, please. Well, so right now we have tools. When protocols come in, they come in for FDA through the gateway. They come in and you could review them with tools such as Lorenz, DocuBridge. But you could also, next slide, you could also review it with just a PDF reader, right? And next slide. And then what do we do? We've been going page by page, hyperlink to hyperlink, back and forth through the protocol. This particular protocol, just for FYI, I took off of clinicaltrials.gov for demonstration purposes. Is nothing from the FDA archive. Next slide, please. So this is what's going to happen. M11 is going to break the clinical protocol document-centric paradigm. Once people see the power of a data-driven protocol, the days of going through a PDF will probably go by the wayside. However, we know, M11 knows that when we set out that there will be regions, there will be organizations that still want to use that base case of a docx or a PDF. So that's available, obviously, as well. But the underlying engine will be a full data model. Next slide, please. So I took this is from an earlier version of the tech spec, as you could see there. The tech spec has changed quite a bit because, as I mentioned, we went through public consultation, and so we've been revising the document. But for public consumption here, I'm showing the 2A, 2B version. What you see here is possible overall protocol views, and not just one page, not from one section, but across, you see here, 3 sections. And when one takes these data elements, as you can see, they're modeled. Those are all either text or data driven. Next slide, please. You can render an overall view of a protocol. This is a wireframe. This is for demonstration purposes. There's nothing behind this at this point, but this neat picture. So what you see on the left, overall design, those are all protocol elements that will carry information. Number of arms down below, the schema at this point in time in the template will be a graphic. And so this was built using that protocol. So it was fit into this particular view. And down below, you see the trial interventions. All of those are data elements. And then on the right, this protocol was a couple of years old. It did not have any estimate characteristics in it, but it was easily built because of the data elements that we have in the protocol text back. Next slide, please. So here's two possible safety views. Again, these are not something that FDA endorses. This is just taking a look at what any reviewer, clinical reviewer, medical doc might want to see in a screen safety view. And you see there the section 1, you see information from section 6, study intervention, you see adverse events of special interest section, and you see the safety assessments. And those snippets can then build, next slide please. Those slides can build this. The trial interventions, which you saw, the schema. So if someone's looking at adverse events of special interest in the protocol, reading that section, and they want to refer back to the schema, you could see just by these few wireframes that it's limitless of what you can put together as far as your own views. There could be standard organization views, standard individual reviews, and you could see that on the top command bar where you can do that, and also access to other systems. And all of these, like I said, this is modeled via the technical specification. Next slide, please. And so another cut at the safety review, I put in there the rationale for study intervention. Next slide, please. And then that can easily pop into, as you see in the center box, the rationale for trial intervention. So if one is interested in why a particular drug is being used, that section is there. And this eventually, when there is a real system behind this, this can deliver this information to you immediately once that model is available. It could also, I envision that once it knows the drug class or a trial design, it could, for regulators who will archive across sponsor companies, will be able to serve up similar studies so that the reviewer could take a look at, well, here's the one I'm looking at now. Let me see a half a dozen other ones that are in the same drug class or same trial design and see what those protocols look like. Next slide, please. And of course, the last view I have for you is the stat view, which cuts across four sections, which, as we know, the various stat components are in the study synopsis, are in the objective section, and of course, the statistical considerations section. And then when you take those sections and you leverage those against this particular migraine protocol, next slide, you come up with something like this, where you have the overall design. Statistician will want to look at that. They want to look at number of arms. Of course, the estimins, as I mentioned before, and also sample size, analysis sets, and analyses. Just in this snapshot, one can easily get an understanding as a statistician of what the protocol is about. And of course, they could have the overall views and the idea of reading a linear document and hyperlinking back and forth with your big screens is no longer really needed. And I think I have maybe one more slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so M11 we're really pleased that we have this collaboration with Vulcan and Transliterate and CDISC. This is now into at least 2 years now that we've had this collaboration, and it is needed. As I said earlier, this collaboration, all the people, the process, and the technology has now converged, and there's no going back. The data-driven protocol will be personalized to the reviewer's needs, and that's lowercase reviewer. So that's whether you're in a sponsor company, you're a data manager, you're site personnel, investigator, you could have the protocol delivered, the content delivered however you want it. And that's only possible because of a standardized data model with CDISC, USDM, common terms, definitions, and formats. This is going to make collaboration, communication among protocol stakeholders, regulators, with industry, with CROs, with site personnel. This is definitely a game changer for sure. And of course, all the work that's being done with Exchange formats, whether you want to do it Exchange in DocX, PDF, JSON, or FHIR, that's all going to be there as well. So in talking about converging, within the next several years, all of this will converge, and this is going to be such an unbelievable change to our world of clinical trials. Thank you.
Ron, thank you for that. The collective we've been talking about role-based access to protocol information for as long as I've been involved in this space, and I think your wireframes really bring it to life. So thank you for that, and for the preview of the construct of the UDP project. Noemie, we'll turn to you now and hear your perspective from the regulator seat on the ICH M11 deliverables and the future digitization space.
Exactly. So I'm very pleased to present this view, the regulatory view on basically the ICH M11 deliverable, and particularly, obviously, we're thinking about the end product, which would be the digitalized protocol. So next slide, please. I think it's important to look at the ecosystem and to reflect a little bit on what we went through in Europe recently. So we are looking at 30 countries. Those countries had their different ways of managing the clinical trial assessments. And what did happen is that in January 2022, we went through quite a big change we had the introduction of the clinical trial regulation, which introduced an IT system to enable collaboration between member states, to have a joint assessment, to have one clinical trial dossier being submitted to the member state. And within this dossier, what we did do also was we have the documents, obviously, but we also have structured data. So next slide, please. And within the clinical trial dossier and the structured data, we had to have, obviously, this IT tool that is the clinical trial information system. And this tool has certainly, although obviously member states had to really go through the change management of working with a system that was very different from before and similar for the sponsors, we certainly introduced a different way of submitting the dossier that required structured data. And when we think of ICH M11, it certainly is supporting this way forward, and also it's certainly one way to collect high quality data, and that's certainly what we're starting to notice with the clinical trials that have been submitted to the system. So when we think of the digitized protocol, we can certainly understand how we can capitalize on it and use the technology, the development to advance further. And we look at the advanced analytic tool that our member states would use, our assessors would use, we can certainly enhance it. So next slide, please. And this digitalization that is going on is certainly aligning with the regulation. It would also then provide us the forum to collect potentially more information, more data, and then think of a future where potentially we don't have any more paper, because today sponsors are certainly submitting a PDF, and alongside that there's structured data. So what can we think of a future? Can we think of a future where we will have just structured data? Quite possibly. I think it will require a change management. It will require new ways of working from the perspectives of the assessors. But we're not far from it, I guess. And this structuring of the data is certainly enhancing the efficiency that we've seen so far with the CTR, with certainly a delay, enhanced delay for the validation of the information submitted, or even from the sponsor side, from the preparation of the information. So a lot of benefit that we can realize there. And also from the assessment point of view, the review and the assessment and the reporting has been enhanced as well. So we need to think how we can even do better than what we're doing today. And I think we've seen, as it was commented by Ron, we will have a common table of contents. So this is one way to also ensure there is consistency between sponsors. There is consistency at the side of the regulators when they actually pick up a document, when they actually look at the data, to ensure that they know exactly where to go. So we can imagine the rate efficiency obviously there. And then if we think a little bit further within the policy making, this gathering of data, this collection of data, and the way to actually to analyze it, certainly go in the direction of advancing drug development and guiding our policymakers as well. Next slide, please. So here, what we have is that on the side and the center of the little design there, you've got the clinical trial register data, and we need to think that this is the CT registers are centrally positioned, certainly to play a role in bridging all the data that we would have in various sources. The clinical trial data that we would gain at the time of the clinical trial submission is protocol data, but then we need to think that the sponsor will then report on those. And then when it comes to putting together a marketing authorization application, we will then collect individual patient data. And all of these sources could then be certainly linked to one another, and this is where the importance of standardization and interoperability is quite important. So next slide, please. And I think when we think of the enhancement of drug development and policy making, as I did the report on it, we obviously have to think that data is the way, and it's the element that is supporting the development of the product, shaping the policies, and benefiting the patients. We aim to utilize more data for the drug development for efficiency and patient-centered approach, and I've already mentioned the policy decisions. At the level of the EU network, we certainly have a lot of information, a lot of data in registers. When we think that we've collected data for the last more than 20 years in our previous system, with CDISC, we're starting to really amalgamate quite a lot of information. And then we need to think of how to use this information efficiently, where we might have to combine various sources. And this is where we need to identify the use cases correctly. And if we move to the next slide. The identification of the use cases will enable us to establish the requirement, and I think this is very much what we've done with ICH M11 here. And with this, we drive the standardization to enable the use case to be realized and making the data accessible. So I think that's why I was probably commenting that this work that we're doing is one of the very first in the link towards more streamline and more efficiency in the process of data standardization for clinical trials. So next slide, please. So some key takeaways. I think I've mentioned standard several times. Harmonization, obviously, that has come in and is certainly something we do through ICH M11. We're thinking of the interoperability because, as has been mentioned by various speakers, we need to have this data exchange formalized. We need to think of the access to data, so for patient and patient organization, because certainly we have the concept of the patient approach. Within the EU, you must have heard of ACT-EU, Accelerating Clinical Trial, where we have this platform, stakeholders platform, where patient organizations certainly play quite a critical role. We also have to think about the quality of the data. Accurate, complete, and not timely data is certainly supported by the work we're currently doing. And that's going into the direction of integrity of clinical trials, but not only, because then we can certainly think along the line of the reliability of the outcome. And then analytics platform, I think it was interesting to hear Ron, because that's certainly the direction we're taking here. We need to think of those analytics platform that will support the review and optimize the research process, support the strategic prioritization, but also guide efficiency in the allocation of resources. And then integration of data. I think we already have in various form the inclusion of real-world data when we look at the maximizing marketing authorization application. We can certainly also think of how can we optimize trial design and address challenges in accessibility and inclusivity. And before I finish, next slide, I'd just like to point out to the names that are mentioned on this slide that certainly support all this work that is going on, and I would like to thank them. So thank you very much.
Noemie, thank you. Thank you for pulling us out to the broader perspective of how this protocol being digitized will relate to so many other processes, and for sharing their views from a European regulatory perspective. I mean, this is absolutely collaboration across parties here today, but collaboration really across the globe to make this the most effective and ultimately benefit patients with safer trials, more effective trials, more efficient trials. So Ron and Noemie have given us a great foundation of why this is so critical. We know that we're excited for the collaboration. This collaboration on UDP is bringing together different components. And now we'll turn to Chris Decker from CDISC, who will give us insight to some critical components that will enable success. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Stacy. I definitely didn't want to be the one to follow those two behemoths. It's like opening for in a concert for some big bands. I don't know, but great presentations, and I think it really shows, to Stacy's point, this is a collaboration, and I think having industry and organizations like CDISC and Vulcan and Transcelerate and regulatory agencies engage, and sponsors, engage in this is just great. I mean, as we move forward with this. So next slide. So I really want to provide an overview of the Digital Data Flow Project. So this is a collaboration between CDISC and Transcelerate that started about 3 years ago. And I want to start by providing an overview of that project and what has come out of that, and then talk just a little bit about the partnership that we recently engaged with between CDISC and ICH around M11, and then just a little bit about the how this comes together. Hugh will be talking a lot more about that, but I do want to highlight just a couple of points on this. I also think it's interesting that some of the same slides are showing up in different slide decks. So again, we're doing a good job, I think, aligning and collaborating together as we see these slides. Next slide. So I want to give a little bit of a history lesson before I talk about this slide. If we think about protocol, CDISC put together a protocol representation model almost 15 years ago. I looked it up a couple weeks ago, and it was in 2010. And it was a first attempt at trying to define digital information and a model. And for various reasons, we weren't ready for it. Maybe the technology wasn't ready for it. Maybe we focused too much on the techie stuff and not on the needs and the use cases. But that was the first attempt. And then about 10 years ago, Transcelerate came out with a common protocol template. And that template was, again, a first step, a baby step in a document that we could use that had some metadata fields. And that was started to be taken on board. And what was interesting, Rob DeChico gave me a bit of data that it wasn't actually the large companies that adopted as much in the beginning as it was all the small ones that didn't have infrastructure, that didn't have the ability and already had their own template. As someone said earlier, you know, I've got my own template. So it started to be adopted a lot by academia and by smaller companies. And then about 3 years ago, Transcelerate initiated the Digital Data Flow Project, and we partnered and collaborated with them, again, starting about 3 years ago, with really the goal of, and you've heard it from others on this call, is how do we write once and read many? And I know I said it before, but I'll remind people of my statistic that I presented in the beginning, and that is a company, a big sponsor company, internally did a study and figured out that almost 50% of the information in the protocol was incorrectly transcribed somewhere down the path in some system. And that is a staggering statistic if we think about the quality and robustness of the information. So how do we get away from that document-based paradigm into a digital paradigm where we're breaking down the information in the protocol, we're entering it once, and we're using it all the way through the system. And then when that information comes through to various consumers of this information, whether it be academia or whether it be regulatory agencies, how can they consume that information? I think Ron did a great job at putting up a set of screens of what it could be. And to reiterate, those were just wireframes, so they're not there yet, but that's the direction that we need to go. And it's great to see regulatory think about what those use cases are. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, when you think about an initiative like this, you can't just think about the technology or the model or the standards. You have to think about the holistic aspect of being able to deliver something like this. Because while we're all behind it and we all see it, still hard to sell sometimes. It's hard to get people in understanding the value proposition, how we can make this happen. So as we think about the digital data flow project, it wasn't just about the model, which is what CDISC has been working on. It was also about making sure we had a reference repository, a study definition repository that people could use as an example of how to use the model and how to use the information. Making sure we continue to have collaboration between the different organizations that were engaged in this. Making sure we grew a collaboration forum of vendors, because vendors play a critical role in making sure that we can adopt this as we go forward. Because if they're not adopting it using within their systems, it makes it a larger hurdle for us to get over. So it's about bringing that forum together to make sure we understand what they need from a technology standpoint. And then providing all the suite of tools and resources so that people can learn about it, get up to speed with it, and really understand how we can leverage it. So this is just like with any big project within our companies, we need to make sure we include all of it. As people say, change management is over half of the effort of any project that you ever do. Next step, next slide. So what is the USDM standard? So this is a model that's come out of the work that we've done with Transliterate over the last 3 years. And it's really made up of a couple of key components. One is the logical model. What is the information in a protocol? What can we standardize? What's structured, like the schedule of activities? What are things that are unstructured, but that we still need to capture within the context of information? There's then the terminology, to make sure we have the right terminology across the protocol and the information. There's making sure we can connect to this information, this model, and all the terminology through an API so that systems can connect to it and can be interoperable in terms of the information. Making sure we have an implementation guide and examples so that you actually know how to use it. You know, this is one of the challenges. You go and you develop a technology or tool or a model and you don't actually give the information of how to use it. So it's really key that all these pieces are part of what we deliver when we talk about the unified study data model, or unified study definition model, as we go through this exercise. So it's really about all the pieces that are involved in that. And one of the exercises we've done, and you'll see it in future slides, is over the last 6 to 8 months with M11, is to make sure that M11 is harmonized with this model. So with the release, our latest release earlier this year, version 3, we have a release that's number 1, robust, and number 2, incorporates and harmonizes the M11 pieces. And we'll continue to do that. As Ron said, M11 is evolving. It's not final yet. So as it continues to evolve, we'll continue to make sure we're harmonized with it, and it's part of this overall model. So M11 is a subset of the overall USDM model that we have. Next slide. So I just want to talk shortly about the CDISC-ICH partnership. We started to have conversations with ICH M11 back in the fall, and one of the conversations we were having is ICH M11 was looking for that location as we talk about the terminology of M11. Where can we store and manage that terminology? And the reality is that CDISC has been managing terminology for over 20 years, and we have a robust process. We know how to vet it with our community, and we're able to manage that information as we go forward. So next slide. So one of the things that we've done, and I just wanted to mention this is something Ron usually shows and has shown, is the pieces and parts as we think about the structured harmonized protocol, the M11 pieces, and it's really about a guideline and a template and a technical specification. But the terminology itself is something we need to manage through a process. So next slide. So we are in the, whoops, too many slides. Go back one. What we've recently done is reached an agreement, which we're working on finalizing, is a memorandum of understanding between ICH and CDISC. And what we're going to do within this memorandum of understanding is CDISC is going to be is going to manage the unified governance process and terminology for the long-term support of the M11 terminologies. And we're going to curate and maintain those terminologies and follow our process for how we get public review. And we're going to work with ICH on this to ensure that those terminologies, number one, just like all of our others, are freely available to the public, and that they're reviewed in a rigorous way and then aligned with what ICH needs. To be clear, CDISC is the governor of this process. We're helping to manage and facilitate it. If you think about a project manager, right? ICH owns their terminology. And so we're going to work to align that and extend it to help support them. But it's ICH's terminology that CDISC is supporting in terms of the process as we move forward. Next slide. So I want to talk just a little bit about, and Hugh is going to talk about it from the Vulcan perspective, but how do these pieces come together as we think about the work that we've done through digital data flow in defining USDM, the M11 template that's evolving to a final version over the next year and a half, and then UDP, bringing it all together in one way. So if we go to the next slide, and you've seen this once already, I'm showing it, and you'll see a different version of it with Hugh, a slightly different version, but all talking about the same thing as we think about each organization and their role in this process. Where we talk about with CDISC and Transcelerate, I've already mentioned it, but we're defining the USDM model, and within that USDM model, which is a much broader model and a more granular model of how we can really enable the protocol and the design from the beginning and drive automation. So as you think about the different stakeholders and the use cases they have, with a sponsor company, they need to be able to drive automation. They need to be able to say, I'm going to build a schedule of activities and then push a button, and a lot of things downstream happen. Regulatory agencies don't need that, right? Regulatory agencies need to consume this. So they're a different use case. They don't need necessarily all that level of granularity. But I do think some of that granularity that we have within the model, as we continue to evolve this, could really continue to help regulatory get even more and more information, and academia and other types of stakeholders. In terms of the work, we also have, as I mentioned, the terminology, both the M11 and the USDM terminology, being able to produce this information in different formats, as Ron alluded to before, and then conformance rules, making sure that as these USDM models and the information is being produced, that we also have conformance around that information to make sure that the technology and the solutions producing this actually conform to a set of rules. And then having implementation guides to make sure that it's being implemented in the correct way. So that's sort of the piece it is, and I'll leave it to Hugh to talk about the other pieces as we talk about UDP bringing this together. And then the final slide, which I think, again, Hugh will talk about as well, is this timeline as we look through the different deliverables across our organizations and what we need to be able to come together and deliver. I mentioned USDM and the model. For those that have been involved with this and engaged, we came out with a 1.0, and that was really, to be honest, you talk about technology and software. 1.0 is kind of an alpha release, right? We were testing it. It had basic concepts in it. We were learning as we go. 2.0 was advanced on that. We started to put a lot more detail into the model. We got into that granular nature of things like, again, schedule of activities, inclusion, exclusion criteria. And then as we got to version 3 earlier this year, we really got to what we feel is a production model of USDM that can really start to be used and leveraged. And again, it's harmonized with what we have in M11 today. And as we move to USDM 4.0 in alignment with the work being done, ICH, Vulcan, we're going to continue to harmonize that model and make sure when it's released, it has all the information that we need with M11. And it won't end there, right? As you know, with any model, you don't stop and it's good. We continue to evolve and add as we go forward, making sure we adjust for compatibility and interoperability as we go. So that's our piece. And as I mentioned, we're really excited. And in my 30 years in this industry, I've really not seen this collaboration between organizations. And I might sound like a broken record a little bit on that, but it's been really good as we work through this and go forward. So thank you, Stacey. I think I'm done.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think that was a fantastic overview of these core components that really are the foundation for that harmonized digital protocol and that harmonization that has to happen across. So now we turn to Hugh and utilizing the digital protocol. I think that project very aptly named as that collaboration to get to the utilization. So Hugh, take it away.
Thank you, Stacey, and thank you, Chris, for providing me with lots of speaking points. Shame you didn't write the slides for me as well. Next slide, please. So you've seen this slide now multiple times. My friend the chicken is here as well. What I'm trying to do in this set of slides is to provide context in a number of different areas. The chicken will just try and keep you on track as to which area I'm dealing with at a time, because otherwise we may get lost. So next slide, please. So if we take all these components and we break them apart and put them into the different sections, they're all dealing with different use cases. They're all dealing with different things. What's Vulcan really here to try and do? The real fundamental is that with the umbrella, we sit over it, we try and keep all the pieces functioning together, we give some infrastructure, some background, and I'm going to talk about some of those pieces in a minute. There are multiple use cases that we are concerned with. The initial starting point, as Ron said earlier, was thinking about getting the protocol into a digital format. What are you then going to do with it? We were all asked at the beginning to come up with our ideas and why we thought this was an important project. Everybody has variants on it. What UDP really wants to do is try and pull all these different ideas together so that the way in which it's used, we are looking at from the beginning, and we end up with a standard that really covers the whole gamut of things that we might want to do, rather than producing a standard and then deciding, well, actually, we could do with extending this and we can do with putting some more bits. So next slide, please. So to really give a little bit of context here, I just want to very briefly explain what HL7 and Vulcan are. And if you advance this, please. So HL7 is the International Standards Organization. FIRE came into existence, I don't know, 10, 12, 14 years ago. It's probably been the most rapidly adopted standard across healthcare of anything that's come out. Within that structure, we have a number of FIRE accelerators, Vulcan being one of them. There are a number of others, and we are all part of this global community. So advance, please. And you can see here we've got lots of different accelerators, lots of different community groups, user groups. We're really covering the entire span of areas of interest, and also geographically the entire span. Next slide, please. So within Vulcan specifically, there's a slide here just showing our membership. We've got something like 45 different members now. We come from a whole range of different organizations. And the fundamental of what we're trying to do with all of these areas in all the different sectors is to plug some of the gaps. So plugging the gap between clinical research and clinical care, plugging the gap at times between different collaborators where they could actually work together but aren't at the moment, plugging the gap where we're short on resources for doing things, and plugging the gap where there's either a lack of training or a lack of tooling. So that really Vulcan is here to try and just help things along rather than having just a single objective. Next slide, please. So how do all these pieces fit together? Because it kind of looks, when you first come to this, that, well, ICH is building structures and models of stuff, and CDISC can transcelerate the building stuff. And now we've got this FIRE thing coming along, and that's going to start doing models of things. Don't we have some sort of competitive process here, and which one's going to win out in the end? Well, if we advance this, a simple example for you. Next slide, please. Thank you. If you think about building something, you start off wherever you are in the world, there's some sort of planning regulations and building regulations. And advance this, please. As you go forwards to more particular detail, you'll find as a specific plan gets drawn up for your particular building. Within that, you'll find there's more detail again, maybe on how you're actually going to produce the roof trusses, lots and lots of fine detail. Those are probably things that come from some standard package. And then eventually you end up with something physical that actually happens, something you can actually live in. We've got the same pattern here when you look at this from a digital perspective. And advance, please. So we have at the lower levels, so the building regulations, the specific plans, you've got USDM, you've got C#, M11, providing that big picture structure, the information model, the thing that describes what each individual element is. At the physical level, where you're going to pass data from one place to another, you've got the fire model. And the fire model is just doing standard stuff in standard ways, like roof trusses, standard things. We know how to do those. We don't need to go off and write new tools, new code for handling it. We can just package the content that comes in USDM into those standard components and push them on. So next slide, please. So fire itself is really a set of building blocks. For those of you that have got children or grandchildren, which is probably the majority of you, you'll have seen Lego bricks. They're pretty ubiquitous. They're very much like the standard building blocks that you've got within fire. They are standard things. They don't do anything very specific, but you can do an awful lot of different things with them. So they are the core of fire. The rest of the pieces around it are making use of very standard structures, very standard components, and are addressing the requirements really of the global community. So next slide, please. What we're doing within Vulcan, and really in all the accelerators, is to take this pile of Lego bricks and produce implementation guides that tell you how you can assemble those bricks into something specific that's useful. And you get a huge variety of different things that can come out of that. They're not specific bricks that can only use one particular function. They're bricks that can be used for multiple different purposes. It's worth saying also that fire is entirely open source, so you don't have to go and become a member of HL7 or pay a license fee to make use of fire. It's out there. You can just go out and use it. Next slide, please. Again, you've seen this slide before. We talked through the upper layers of this. I want to focus on the lower levels, and particularly on the sequence of activities that's going on. So we're actually sitting at the moment in the webinar of July the 11th, which is just to left of center at the bottom. But we're also just after the most recent Connectathon. And you'll see Connectathons are a regular thing we do as we go forward. So next slide, please. What is a Connectathon? If you've never been to one, it's difficult to explain how functional and effective it is as a way of doing something. You have a room with somewhere between 300 and 500 people, all sitting around, all trying to make use of implementation guides to solve specific problems. Each table in this room, and there's something like 40 tables, has got a particular topic that they're dealing with. And so the people around the table, the fire standard you've got, the sets of sample data they've got, the test systems they've got, they're all trying to make stuff actually work. And the great beauty of that is that we all know that when you first try doing something, things don't work. There are simple problems that if you're all sitting around together, you can actually get on and make something work. Whereas if you're all in isolation, it doesn't work. You don't quite know why it doesn't work. You get frustrated with it. You decide you'll come back to it tomorrow, and it just takes longer and longer. Get everybody in a room together, and you can ask the person next to you or the expert that's on the other side of the room to come and help you sort out whatever that particular thing is. And I think this has made more of a difference to the adoption of FHIR than anything else. It's such a robust mechanism. Next slide, please. So we are running connectathons on a 3 times a year basis. So January, May, and September are the standard HL7 connectathons. The May connectathon was our first UDP connectathon. And I want to stress that what we were really focused on was actually a document. So everybody that's gone before me has been focusing on how wonderful it will be when we can break all the content of the document into individual fields and manage those and get data-driven and content-driven expression of a protocol. We do have to recognize that that is a process that will take time. And while we are making that transition, there will be people who need to carry on using good old paper documents with all their problems and all the obstructions that you get as a consequence of it. We cannot actually get away from them. So our very first starting point was simply to say, if we have a document, can we actually transfer that from one place to another in FHIR in a way that leaves people feeling they started with a document and have ended up with a document? They've not actually lost anything of the way they do things at the moment. So next slide, please. What we had set up to test this out, we had 6 protocols that we rewrote in the M11 format so that all the pieces were in the right places. We then had 2 different suppliers, one from CDISC for the USDM model. They had an Excel tool and a web tool for doing this. And we had computable publishing that has a thing called the Fever platform. Within that, they have written some tooling for dealing with M11. Both of those were able to take in the manually created protocol, put that into FHIR format, and then send it through to a FHIR server. When it was on the FHIR server, we could use a general purpose viewing tool to look at the content of that protocol on that FHIR server. And that was a way of seeing that that protocol that had started off as an ordinary document was still something that we could all understand. Lots of different ways in which you might render it, but still a document that you could understand. But you could also then start to send things back. So once it's on a FHIR server, the tools were able to pull it off the FHIR server, pull it back into their report process. And the web tool from CDISC and the Fever platform were able to write out an HTML version of it, so something that was quite readable. And the CDISC web tool was also able to produce a PDF version of it. So we've actually got that transition where something started in a paper format, or a virtual paper format at any rate, a manual created protocol, send it right the way through to a FHIR server, pull it back, generate a PDF document at the end of it. Next slide, please. So I'd rather summarize this already. We actually were able to take these 6 protocols. We were able to demonstrate that successful representation in FHIR and passing it backwards and forwards. So next slide, please. Where we're going next for September, we want to look at some of the metadata around it. I think it's worth stressing at this point that it's part of the process of getting things up and running smoothly. You want to be able to manage your security. You want to be able to manage the ownership of things. You want to manage the titles. These are the things that go into your metadata. We're also probably going to start looking at inclusion-exclusion criteria, and particularly we want to expand the number of vendors that come and join us and work on the system. As we go forward into next year, we'll start to take other areas, maybe the objectives and endpoints, schedule activities, and start to represent those in a more granular format. Next slide, please. So we need involvement from people. If we don't get involvement from people, we're not going to achieve as much as we might otherwise. So if you go out, you search HL7 Connectathon, you'll find the link into the September Connectathon. You go off, find out whether that's something that you want to be involved in. We really would encourage a lot of people to come and join into that. I've already mentioned this is a regular series of webinars. We'll do one after each of the Connectathons, and then we'll provide other events probably in between those webinars. Particularly, we want to get some sort of community of interest running where we can hear about people's real business process. So what you actually have to change within your business in order to be able to adopt a digital protocol. What things do we need to do to make that process smoother for you? Last slide, please. That was my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugh, for the detail on the Utilizing Digital Protocol project itself. We've heard about the big picture that's coming. We've heard about the building blocks that are still in process for sure, the collaboration coming together. I think there's a lot of questions already coming in around okay, what do we do with all of that? Implementation and change management is the hardest part. Mary Lynn, can you give us some thoughts around the pathway to implementation?
Absolutely, and I don't profess to have all of the answers, but I can at least start the conversation about implementation. Next slide, please. So this timeline is showing the sort of continuum building toward a digital protocol. There have been many efforts from Transcelerate to lay the groundwork for data and digital transformation in the R&D environment. And really the ultimate goal, as each of our speakers has mentioned, is to be able to transition clinical research from a paper-based way of working that's filled with manual steps and isolated systems to a data-based, more efficient way of working with automated steps and connected systems. Transcelerate's first efforts in this space in 2012 was the Clinical Data Standards Initiative, and this was a collaboration with other organizations that aimed to develop industry-wide data standards in priority therapeutic areas. In 2014, the Common Protocol Template workstream was launched, and as part of this workstream, structured content was introduced into a Microsoft Word-based and then a technology-enabled protocol template. To build on that, a technology-enabled common statistical analysis plan and clinical study report template were developed that enabled automated reuse of shared information across the documents. So we demonstrated that you could export information from a clinical trial protocol automatically into a CSR or a SAP. In 2018, the foundational work that produced the Common Protocol Template spurred the formation of the ICH M11 Working Group, which you have heard a lot about. And in 2020, the Vulcan Fire Accelerator was launched with Transcelerate as a convener. The Digital Data Flow Initiative, in collaboration with CDISC, provided a vendor-agnostic way to enable interoperability and reuse across the clinical trial lifecycle using the USDM, which, as Chris stated, is an industry standard data format or model for trial designs. And the Vulcan UDP project really leverages each of these existing protocol representations that are digital and adds a FHIR representation to enable interoperability between clinical trial design and execution and patient care. Next slide, please. So the products of these initiatives enable protocol digitization to increasing degrees. And the question that remains is, how do we turn these products into a solution that we can use? The implementation of process changes, I think we can all agree upon, can be difficult and take a really long time. But one way you can start is really by identifying your organization's priority use case. What is the pain point in your organization's protocol process that you are trying to solve? For instance, we show some examples on the right-hand part of this slide. Is your organization interested in reusing information that's contained within a protocol across documents or performing analytics across studies? Is your organization interested in building automated clinical trial system workflows? These are just a few of the sort of big buckets of possibilities. Implementation is also really reliant on each of us increasing our knowledge about each type of clinical protocol standard or tool that's being offered by the organizations that we've spoke about, such as ICH M11, Transcelerate, CDISC, HL7, and Vulcan, that enables that clinical trial protocol information exchange. And I know personally, I'm always learning, I'm always growing in my knowledge of the tools that are available in the space of digital protocols. This knowledge really can be applied toward engaging the stakeholders and decision makers within your organization. It can be used to engage with vendors who are capable of building the solutions we're looking for, as well as engaging with other external stakeholders who are responsible for creating guidelines and enabling tools. So also, as you engage with your stakeholders, try to understand the what's in it for me for each of them to better communicate the why and enable that really difficult change management piece. Next slide, please. And as my fellow panelists have shared, there are many use cases for a digital protocol. So I'll run through just a few of them today, but really the possibilities are endless. For example, imagine automatically creating CRFs or generating cost projections from your digital protocol. A schedule of activities that has procedure instructions could be digitally transmitted to a site in a really easy to visualize and easily digestible format using a viewer that's maybe created by an IT developer, similar to what Ron showed in his slides as wireframes. A machine-readable clinical trial protocol could be transmitted to a health authority and reviewed in real time. A sponsor who's writing a protocol or a regulator who is reviewing a protocol could perform design analytics on existing protocols in order to optimize the design or the feedback. And then finally, imagine not having to copy and paste or retype in different ways the same piece of information from your clinical trial 20 times, which, as Chris mentioned, is very error prone. Next slide, please. As I shared earlier, really understanding the value of each type of clinical protocol standard or tool offered by each of these organizations and initiatives is foundational for implementation. The ICH M11 template provides a harmonized standard for the format and structure of the clinical trial protocol that is fit for regulators and sites. The ICH M11 technical specification describes the vocabulary and other technical attributes of each piece of content that's contained within the protocol to really enable a computer to understand it and consume it and put it into context within the protocol. The USDM, the Unified Study Definition Model, describes additional technical attributes. For example, it provides more information about the relationships of each piece of content that's contained within the protocol. And this brings us even a step closer toward automated clinical data flow. And finally, FHIR provides a set of specifications for exchanging electronic healthcare data, which could enable the clinical trial protocol to speak directly to sites and also enable sites to transmit patient data directly back to sponsors. Next slide, please. It seems to be coming up slowly. There we go. But I can start. So how can you interact with these organizations and initiatives to take the first steps toward implementation of a digital protocol? ICH M11 drew upon publicly available templates, including the Transcelerate Common Protocol template, to develop the table of contents with its major headers. Aligning your internal template to the CPT would bring you one step closer toward the structure of the ICH M11 protocol template. You can also familiarize yourself with the draft template guideline and technical specification, and you can participate in the upcoming public review of the M11 technical specification. You can also reference the DDF Technology Architecture Scenarios tool for examples of implementation patterns for the incorporation of DDF assets into your sponsor environment. And you can also enhance your understanding of DDF by attending the DDF Vendor Showcase, DDF in Action Day, and the CDISC US Interchange. Also, you can participate in upcoming CDISC public reviews. Finally, you can attend future UDP webinars, learn more about FHIR, and participate in an upcoming Connectathon that Hugh described so nicely, whose purpose is to test the FHIR specification and implementation in the context of the UDP project. And ways to participate include performing the actual testing, bringing your own protocols or software. You don't have to be a techie to be able to contribute to the Connectathon. You can attend and contribute your insights into the business process. You can also send your R&D, IT rep, or vendor, or you can contribute test protocols by converting protocols to the ICH M11 USDM format, and then share your learnings. And the next Connectathons, as Hugh announced, are taking place this September in Atlanta and in January 2025 virtually. And thank you so much for taking that first step with me toward implementation, and I think we're moving to Q&A. Stacy?
That's right. I'm going to invite all the panelists to come back on screen. Mary Lynn, thank you for helping us look ahead to what is to come and what we can do now. I want to thank all of the attendees. We've had quite a lot of great questions through the registration process, through the panel here. And they're not clarifying questions. They're questions about what now, what do we do next? How is this all going to come together? I think it shows the value of this collaboration and continuing this kind of dialogue. So it speaks to the value of future webinars, but I think there's some additional communications that we as organizations can pull together to help folks navigate from today to tomorrow. So in the time that we have, I'm going to focus on some very practical questions. I'm going to combine a few. We have questions about how will these protocols be created? Can a document protocol and a digital protocol coexist? Are we really flipping from one to the other, or will they both continue to coexist? We have questions around what format the stakeholders will need them. Ron, Noemie, what formats do you need to receive as regulators? What formats do sites need to receive? So a lot of the practical nuts and bolts. And I know that we can't answer all those questions today, but I thought I'd go around and maybe get some thoughts on that. Ron, maybe I'll start with you. Can you give a couple of thoughts on the practical aspects to implementation?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to be living with the PDF for a while. I mean, it's not going to be a fast transition for some regions. So as I said, M11 going into this knew that we could not abandon the docx and the PDF format. But other regions, other regulatory agencies, sponsors will want to leverage the digitized protocol for all the use cases that Mary Lynn talked about, and probably some that we haven't even imagined yet. So I think as a regulatory agency, as everyone knows, that CDISC for FDA, CDISC data standards are required for use in clinical trials. FDA has the authority to require a digitized protocol. However, I want to make it clear there have not been any formal discussions on this at this point in time. So I think we're going to be living in a parallel world for a while.
Thank you, Ron. Hugh, maybe I'll ask you to speak next, and maybe you can also tie into some of the practical aspects of connecting to the other fire resources and the HL7 work that's being done.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I absolutely agree that we're not going to get rid of PDF anytime soon. I think in terms of what formats do people need, though, one of the things to remember is that once you've got your protocol in a digital format, you've then got a set of machinery there that allows you to produce things in the format that you want. So rather than it being a question of what formats are you going to be forced to produce, you can start to say, well, what format would you like? Because if you've got it in that digital format, that generation becomes a much, much easier process. And I think that we've got to remember also that we're not doing this in a vacuum. We are doing it within the entire tooling ecosystem, being the popular word, that we've got with fire now. So there's lots of things that people have already done. Some of the tooling pieces that we used within our connectathon were produced before there was any thought of doing a digital protocol. They were just general fire tools, and they allow you to pick things up and start to run with them. So all of those other implementation guides that have been done all potentially are relevant to what we do. The question is the use case that we're going to work with. And that's where Mary Lynn's list of use cases at the end is so important, because I really want people to be thinking about which use cases they would like to prioritize, what they would like to bring to us as a question of how are we going to resolve this particular problem.
Thank you, Hugh. Maybe I'll just summarize the question and make it a bit of a comment. There were a number of questions around timeline, accessibility of some of these building blocks as they are being developed, the ICH guidelines, the USDM, the fire implementation guide, and an acknowledgement that all of these things are evolving independently and connected. They all have their own independent timelines, but they are all need to be integrated. And I think, you know, this webinar, we're trying to show some of that connectivity through the broad timeline. And it will be through continued communication readout in forums such as this, and in additional communications that need to come out from this group and the individual organizations as well that will help it all tie together. The evolution will continue, so for attendees, encourage you to get involved, as Mary Lynn said, and to keep abreast of the UDP project, where we can share that consolidated joint messaging across to show the connectivity.